Hey everyone, welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. On this channel, I share stories about encounters with mysterious beings from beyond the skies. These tales are perfect for helping you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we get into today's story, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Now, get comfy and let's dive into the story. It all started one Saturday morning in early April. I was out in my yard to fill the bird feeder when I noticed something unusual. There on the lawn were these small, perfectly round patches, each about the size of a golf ball and slightly darker than the rest of the grass. Initially, I thought they were just dead spots or maybe a sign of fertilizer burn, but I hadn't laid anything down that season yet. Curious, I bent down and touched one. It was dry and brittle, almost as if it had been scorched, but not blackened or anything too dramatic. The strange thing was the precision of these patches. They weren't random at all, but neat little circles, 10 of them, laid out in 3 rows with an additional one slightly off to the side, like an incomplete corner. At first, I didn't make much of it, thinking perhaps a kid might have dropped something hot there, or maybe someone had flicked cigarette butts into the yard during the night. Although my backyard is fenced and I have motion-sensing lights, it's certainly not impenetrable. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a slight unease, I decided to check the spots again the next morning. They were still there, unchanged in size and appearance, but now there were more. Another row had appeared, completing the corner and forming a perfect square grid, 4 by 4. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. To get to the bottom of this, I pulled up the security cam footage from the past couple of nights. I have 2 cameras, one on the back porch and another by the side gate. They record all night and save the footage locally. Watching the recordings at double speed, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the porch light being triggered a few times by bugs, but no people, no animals, no mysterious shadows, and certainly no one walking around placing objects. Over the next few nights, I kept the cameras rolling as usual and tried not to dwell on it too much. However, each morning brought more circles, always the same size and spacing. The grid kept expanding, and by the 4th morning, it had covered nearly half the yard in perfect rows, each circle maybe an inch deep, with no tracks leading to or from them. Finally, I decided to talk to my neighbor, Matt, a retired mechanic who lives just behind me. He's a private guy, but always friendly enough. I asked him if he'd noticed anything odd in his yard or heard any strange noises during the night. He hadn't, nor did he have any cameras that might have caught something I missed. Showing him the bizarre patterns in my yard, he was just as baffled as I was. So here we are, sharing this strange encounter with you. What could be causing these mysterious patterns? Feel free to share your thoughts or if you've experienced anything similar. Let's try to unravel this mystery together. I stared at it for a minute before saying, "That's not natural." Hearing someone else voice my thoughts made the whole situation feel more intense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I made coffee and sat by the back door, the porch light off, the curtains slightly open to watch the yard. It was a quiet night, just a gentle breeze and the distant calls of owls. Around 3:20 a.m., the motion light on the far side of the yard flickered on briefly. I leaned forward, trying to see if anything was moving, but there was nothing, and the light went off again. After that, everything remained still for another hour. No lights, no sounds. The next morning, I checked the cameras. Nothing had changed, except 8 new circles in the grid, all perfectly spaced. I grabbed a tape measure to check the distance between each circle, exactly 12 inches from center to center, like they were laid out by a machine with no room for error. Curious, I placed little flags around the newest row of circles to see if they'd be disturbed by morning. They weren't, but the circles had been scorched into the ground between them, as if something had moved straight through without touching the flags. At this point, I was on edge, constantly checking the yard, sometimes even flashing a light out there in the middle of the night, but I never saw anything. One night, I decided to leave a cheap drone hovering over the yard with a GoPro attached. It recorded everything perfectly until exactly 2:47 a.m., when the footage just turned to static, like the snowy interference on old TVs, lasting until 3:12 a.m. and then it resumed as if nothing had happened. That same night, I found 3 burn marks on my front lawn, a place I had no cameras watching. No one could have come through the front without setting off the driveway lights, and they hadn't. The next day, I casually mentioned it to the homeowners association. I wasn't making a formal complaint, just inquiring if anyone else had noticed strange patterns in their yards. A few chuckled, making jokes about crop circles. But Julia, from 4 streets down, asked more seriously if I was talking about brown spots. When I described what I'd seen, she admitted to finding similar small circles by her back fence, though she had thought they were just fungus or something. I drove over that afternoon to take a look. She showed me her yard. Fewer circles, but the same size and shape as those in mine, and like mine, she didn't have cameras either. The circles in my yard had stopped appearing by then. They didn't fade or change. They stayed as if etched permanently into the ground. I even had a lawn specialist come out to take a look, but he was stumped. He said it didn't match any lawn disease or pest damage he'd ever seen, and the soil underneath seemed perfectly fine. We tried reseeding one of the circles, but nothing took. The seeds just sat on top, as if the soil beneath wasn't real anymore. I no longer check each morning. The spread had ceased, and obsessing over it only made things feel worse. Yet, occasionally, I'd find myself abruptly awake at 3 a.m., with no dreams or noises to blame, just a sudden alertness as if someone gently nudged me awake. I've stopped looking out the window during these moments. One day, while sitting in my truck in a grocery store parking lot, I noticed a missed call. There was no number, just unknown, and the timestamp was 2:37 p.m. I saw the missed call at 2:52 p.m. without ever hearing my phone ring. Town reception is patchy, but usually I still receive voicemails. This one appeared silently in my call log, as if it had always been there. Curious, I played the message, half expecting a butt dial or robocall. Instead, all I heard was static, low, broken, like an old radio struggling to find a signal, followed by a mechanical, uneven clicking sound, as if a gear was skipping. Just as I was about to delete it, something else came through. A whisper. It was soft, barely audible, and I had to lean in. It sounded like interference, but then I recognized the voice. It was mine. The voice uttered a single word or something that resembled one. Corin. I've never used that word, never said it, and the tone was eerie, like I was scared or hiding. I replayed the message. The same static, the same clicking, the same whisper. I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. I was off work, just staying home until this trip to the store. I hadn't made any calls or sent any messages, and I certainly hadn't recorded anything. I rarely use voice memos. I exited the voicemail app and checked my call logs, no number, no contact, just unknown at 2:37. I looked through old voicemails, usual stuff, pharmacy reminders, calls from my brother, my mom forgetting a movie name. Nothing like this. Driving home, I mulled over possible explanations. A prank seemed unlikely. Only friends, family, and work had my number. Maybe a pocket recording or a strange echo from a past call. But the clicking noise didn't fit, and the voice didn't sound quite right. Not like it usually does in recordings. It sounded altered, distorted. That evening, I left my phone on the kitchen table, trying to distract myself with dinner and TV shows, though my attention wasn't fully there. Close to midnight, I checked my phone again. No new calls or texts, but the battery had plummeted from 82% to 14%, and the phone felt warm, as if it had been in use, though there were no apps running in the background. I plugged it in to charge and eventually headed to bed. At around 3:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a single vibration from the phone. One night, I thought I heard my phone buzz, so I reached for it only to find the screen black. There was nothing new, no notifications or messages, just an old, unplayable voicemail that wouldn't open unless accessed directly from the voicemail menu. Trying to save or forward it was futile. The file just wouldn't load. The following day, I asked a tech-savvy friend to take a look. He suggested it might be interference, perhaps from a CB radio. Curiously, he noted the voice on the voicemail sounded like someone impersonating me, not my actual voice, which really bothered me. We attempted to transfer the file to his laptop to isolate the voice, but had no luck. The file refused to transfer via text, email, Bluetooth, or even a direct cable connection. which strangely wouldn't display the voicemail folder at all. That night, I left my phone in the living room and went to sleep. Around 2:45 a.m., I woke up without any noise, just a strange sensation that someone had just walked past my bedroom. I checked the house. Everything was secure, nothing out of place, but my phone was lit up in the living room. No notifications were visible, but the screen was on, and the voicemail app not only opened but paused at the exact second where a voice that sounded like mine said the word "right." I shut the phone down for the night. In the morning, I turned it back on to find everything normal. The mysterious voicemail had vanished as if it had never existed. I chalked it up to a glitch and moved on. However, 4 nights later, around the same time, I woke up again. This time, the phone was off, but the screen glowed with a dim backlight showing only the battery icon. It wouldn't turn on or off until it finally dimmed out on its own. In the morning, everything worked again, but my call log showed a new, unknown entry, timed at 2:37 a.m. No voicemail, just a blank entry like a missed call. After that, I started turning my phone off at night and removing the battery, stashing it in a drawer. This worked for a while until one afternoon, while doing laundry, I heard a faint, crackling noise from the bedroom. I traced it back to the drawer where I kept the phone, which was still off, battery in my hand, yet it emitted a low, rhythmic popping sound from the speaker. After dropping my smartphone in the garage, I switched back to using an old flip phone. I haven't charged the smartphone since, and it's now tucked away in a cabinet, wrapped in a towel inside a shoebox, just in case. Sometimes, I still wake up around 2:30 in the morning. It doesn't happen every night, but it's often enough that I've noticed it. When it does happen, I feel like there's a word I need to say, something that's just on the tip of my tongue, but I never actually say it. The first weird thing happened with our backyard motion sensor light. It flicked on around midnight, whenever the thing was quiet. We had installed it because there had been a few break-ins around our neighborhood, and it made us feel safer. But that night, it turned on without any apparent reason. I looked out the window and saw nothing. Maybe it was just an animal or a bug, I thought. The yard, full of trees, often has shadows moving with the wind at night, so I wasn't too worried at first. However, when it happened again a few nights later at the same time, I started to feel uneasy. The light would come on, the camera would start recording, and then it would all switch off a minute later. The next morning, I checked the footage, but there was nothing. No figure, no shadow, no movement, just an empty yard lit by the floodlight. My wife thought I was overthinking things, suggesting maybe the camera was faulty or the sensor too sensitive. But then the light started going off at various times, 1:30 a.m., 3 a.m., and once close to 4 a.m., always with the same result. The light flicked on, the camera recorded briefly, then everything shut off with no signs of any activity. It got to me how precise it was. The sensor never failed, yet the camera never showed anything. We tried everything, checked and swapped the sensor and camera batteries, adjusted the angle, even cleaned the lens in case it was a bug close to the sensor. Nothing changed. One night, I stayed up watching from the kitchen window. The house was silent, the kids were asleep, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the lawn. Around 2:15 a.m., the light clicked on. I looked out but saw nothing. I stepped outside quietly. The air was cool and still. The yard was undisturbed, no animals, not even a leaf stirring. I thought it might be some kind of electrical interference or a false alarm, so I headed back inside. But I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that lingered. A couple of nights after the light first came on, it happened again. This time, however, my phone buzzed with an alert from the motion sensor camera app. I quickly pulled up the live feed. The yard was deserted, illuminated only by the harsh white floodlight. I began zooming in, half expecting to catch a stray cat or a raccoon lurking in the shadows. But all I saw was motionless grass and flickering shadows. I kept the feed open, watching intently for any sign of movement. Minutes ticked by, and the yard remained still, the shadows dancing slightly in the breeze. Just as I was about to give up and turn off the feed, something strange caught my eye. On the left edge of the frame, there was a subtle distortion, like a heat shimmer rising off hot asphalt. Yet, it was not a warm night. The distortion flickered momentarily, and then disappeared. I blinked, looked again, but it was gone. Rewinding the footage, I played it back several times. Each time, the distortion was there, a brief, faint ripple, and then nothing. That night, sleep eluded me. Over the next week, the motion sensor kept activating at odd times, sometimes twice consecutively, other times hours apart. Each activation showed the same uneventful scene: an empty yard, trees swaying gently, and the shadows of branches dancing under the floodlight. I even set up a second camera from a different angle, hoping to capture whatever was setting off the sensor. This camera had night vision, but for several nights, it captured nothing out of the ordinary. However, one night around 3 a.m., something new happened. The sensor went off again, and this time I immediately checked the footage. The area captured by the night vision showed an unusual patch of complete darkness, as if the infrared was unable to reflect off that particular spot. It appeared as a void in the middle of the yard, while the rest of the surroundings, the trees and fence, were visible in shades of gray. The following morning, I inspected the yard. The grass where the dark patch had appeared was slightly flattened, but showed no other signs of disturbance, no scorch marks, no wetness. Interestingly, each time the motion sensor was triggered, the appearance of the dark spot changed slightly. Sometimes it was wider, sometimes narrower. At times the grass seemed more flattened, other times less so. This pattern led me to believe that something was occurring on a schedule. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I started waking up around 2 or 3 a.m., just before the expected times of the sensor's activation. One night, following another alert, I stepped outside into the cold, quiet air. The street was empty, the only sound my footsteps on the pavement. I stood in the yard, my eyes fixed on where the black patch had been seen by the camera. I woke up groggy the morning after a late night out, and something didn't feel right. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed a low humming. It was so quiet, more like a vibration I could feel rather than a sound I could hear. I looked around, but couldn't find where it was coming from. The humming just stayed in the air, not moving or getting louder. It made the hair on my arms stand up, and I felt a chill, like when you sense someone watching you in the dark. After a minute, the humming stopped, and the motion sensor light went out too. I stayed outside a bit longer, but everything went back to being still and quiet. The next day, I asked the neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one had. Everything was as quiet and normal as ever. I started to doubt my own senses. Was I just tired and imagining things? Was the sensor faulty? Even though the motion sensor light would go off, the cameras showed nothing but an empty yard. There was a strange distortion in the footage, though, flickering like a heat wave or a ripple in reality. A few weeks later, I moved the camera to a different spot, hoping to catch something new. The sensor still went off at odd, late-night hours. One night, after an alert around 1:45 a.m., I checked the live feed on my phone. At first, everything looked normal. Then, at the edge of the frame, I saw it. A faint shimmer, like air wavering over a hot road, but colder. I zoomed in, and my phone screen flickered. The shimmer stretched out briefly, like a thin shape moving slowly through the frame. It wasn't solid or bright, just a bending of the air, a subtle change in how light moved across the yard. The motion sensor light stayed on for 2 minutes before shutting off, and the shimmer disappeared. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. The night passed quietly after that. The sensor's pattern didn't change. It kept coming on at random late-night hours, never showing anything concrete on camera, just the empty yard and that strange distortion flickering at the edges. I didn't tell anyone much about it. After a while, my wife asked if I was okay, but I just said the camera was acting up again. Some nights, I would just watch from inside the house, staring at the yard through the window, waiting for the light to flick on. It always did. But what set me on edge the most was that nothing ever moved in the yard when the sensor triggered. No animals, no shadows, no people. Just a quiet yard bathed in artificial light and the feeling that something was there, watching, but never showing itself. I woke up just after 6 a.m. and immediately checked my phone. It was strange because I noticed my watch had stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. The watch, which I wear all the time, had never stopped before, and it was fairly new. Even more bizarre was my phone. I usually leave it on overnight to keep track of any notifications and my sleep, but when I checked, there was a 27-minute gap where there was no activity at all. No screen time, no notifications, nothing. It was as if my phone had shut OFF and then turned back on without any indication. Initially, I thought maybe the watch battery died or there was a glitch with the phone, especially since the phone's battery was almost full before I went to bed. But the type of restart that would have caused such a gap wasn't something I had ever encountered. Despite resetting it, my watch stayed stuck at 3:33. I didn't dwell on it much that day, but by evening, the watch hadn't budged and it started to feel odd. That night, as I got ready for bed around 11:30 p.m., the room felt unusually silent, as if the air was thick. I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling as I lay there, eyes closed, trying to sleep. My thoughts kept going back to the frozen watch and the mysterious gap in my phone's log. Suddenly, I heard a faint buzzing sound, like a radio tuning between stations. I looked towards the window, but saw only darkness. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started, and I wondered if it was just my ears playing tricks on me. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Lights would flicker randomly, the thermostat settings changed without anyone touching it, and I would catch glimpses of shadows from the corner of my eye, but nothing was there when I looked directly. One evening while cooking dinner, the buzzing sound returned, this time louder and coming from the living room. I went to investigate, expecting to find a malfunctioning appliance, but everything was off. The noise ceased the moment I turned on the light. I tried recording the sound on my phone, but again, there was nothing. No sound, no interference, nothing. Convinced that something was wrong, I took the watch to a repair shop. They told me it was in perfect working order internally. The battery was fine, and nothing mechanical seemed amiss. They couldn't explain why it wouldn't move past 3:33. Last night, as I lay in bed, I watched the clock on my wall. It was inching closer to 3:33 a.m., and I was curious whether my watch, which had been stuck on that exact time, would finally move. But it didn't. Right then, my phone's screen went black, only to light up again with no notifications. The next morning, I checked the phone logs and noticed a silent 27-minute gap starting at 3:33 a.m. I was puzzled. Was I losing time? Was my phone rebooting without making a sound? Did this have something to do with the watch? One night, determined to find answers, I set up in my living room with my phone recording both audio and video, the watch right in front of me on the table. As the clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 a.m., nothing changed. The watch stayed stuck. Then at 3:33, a faint buzzing sound filled the air, making the hairs on my neck stand up. The noise grew into a loud buzz, like a swarm of bees in my head, not in the room. At the same time, my phone's screen flickered, and the recording paused for exactly 27 minutes before resuming, with the watch still showing 3:33. After that night, I stopped wearing the watch and kept it in a drawer, though it still made me uneasy. The phone's silent gaps continued to appear at the same time, always 27 minutes long, starting at 3:33 a.m., but nothing else ever happened. No messages, no calls, just that blank space in time. A few weeks later, I checked the watch again one morning, and it was moving, showing the correct time as if nothing had ever happened. The phone log also showed normal activity during that period. I still can't say for sure what was real or what wasn't. All I know is that something strange was happening during those few weeks, every night in that tiny stretch of time, and the watch was frozen, marking that moment. I don't wear the watch anymore, but sometimes, when I glance at a clock or my phone around 3:33, I feel a strange, heavy sensation, as if the world is holding its breath just a bit longer. On a different note, I was abode by a hut halfway through a solo hike in the national forest, a place off the beaten path that I'd been wanting to explore. The day was clear, slightly cooler than usual for late spring, filled with the sounds of birds and the rustling of trees. I took casual photos along the way, capturing the scenery and the small details that often go unnoticed. By mid-afternoon, I reached a clearing near the ridge. The view was spectacular, showing a vast valley below, a blend of trees and farmland stretching into the distance. I pulled out my camera and began taking shots from various angles, enjoying the serene moment. So there I was, trying to get a good wide shot with my camera, when out of nowhere, a sudden flash of white light burst across the frame. It was strange because it wasn't caused by the sun or anything else I could normally identify. It was like someone else had taken a photo from a different angle. But when I blinked and looked around, I was completely alone. No people, no animals, just the empty clearing. I checked the photo on my camera, and there it was, the flash right above the treetops. But looking directly at that spot, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the regular colors of the forest. At first, I thought it might just be a glitch or maybe a lens flare, but it felt weird, unsettling even. So I decided to pack up and head back. Almost as soon as I started down the trail, a thin mist rolled in quickly. It started creeping along the ground and got thicker, until my visibility was down to about 15 feet. It was odd because the sun was still shining, but the temperature dropped, and everything went quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves. I could barely even hear myself walking. It was as if the forest had gone silent, holding its breath. That silence brought an intense feeling of being watched. It wasn't just a nagging thought. It felt heavy, like there were eyes on me from everywhere. I kept looking around as I walked, scanning the fog and the trees, but all I saw were indistinct shapes and shadows. Trying to shake off the nerves, I kept moving. The feeling didn't let up, though. If anything, it intensified. I stopped for a moment near a fallen log to catch my breath and pulled out my camera again. I hoped to see the mysterious flash again, or maybe something else in the photos that I might have missed. But as I scrolled through the images, the camera started acting up. The screen flickered, and pictures were just static and lines. Restarting it didn't fix the issue. The mist was getting thicker, swirling around the trees almost like it was alive. It was getting hard to see the trail. I hadn't seen any trail markers for a while, no signs of any worn path on the ground. It felt like the trail had just vanished. My heart started racing as I tried to stay calm, reassuring myself that the path had to be there somewhere. I thought I saw a shape in the fog ahead, possibly a rock or an old stump. But as I approached, it seemed to shift slightly, almost as if it was aware of my presence. Feeling uneasy, I decided to just stop and wait, hoping the mist would clear. I found a rock to sit on and tried to relax, but the silence was overwhelming. No sound of wildlife, no breeze, just an eerie stillness with the mist continuing to thicken around me. About 20 minutes into my hike, the mist started to clear up a bit. Standing up, I tried to find the trail again, but what caught my attention was my malfunctioning watch. The hands were spinning slowly as if stuck in a loop, and the digital display was completely blank. Pulling out my phone, I realized it was no better off. No signal, no GPS, just a black screen. With no other choice, I started walking again, this time more cautiously, keeping my eyes wide open. As I walked, a strange feeling crept over me, a sense I was being watched, growing stronger with each step. Then, through the fog, I saw a small cluster of lights flickering softly in the distance. They were unlike any campfire or lantern, pulsing gently in hues of white and blue, almost like oversized fireflies, yet too steady. I tried to call out, but my voice seemed muffled, lost in the mist. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved towards the lights. They remained stationary, but as I approached, a heavy pressure built up in my chest, stopping me in my tracks. I looked around. Nothing stirred, just the eerie glow of those lights keeping vigil. Suddenly, they blinked out, and the mist thickened once more, plunging everything into darkness. Fumbling for my flashlight, I found it was dead. I had no choice but to feel my way cautiously back, the way I thought I had come. Gradually, the mist lifted, revealing clearer shapes of the trees. My watch had stopped its odd spinning, and now showed the correct time, though I had no idea how much time had actually passed. Miraculously, my phone sprang back to life, signal and all functions restored, but all the photos I'd taken in the mist were just black frames. I eventually made it back to my car as the sun was setting. The familiar sounds of the forest life returned, the bird calls, the rustle of leaves, a distant dog barking. For a while, I told no one about what happened. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. But a few days later, as I scrolled through my photos, one with a flash of white light stood out, staring back at me like an unanswered question. I still don't understand what happened, or why the mist and silence descended so suddenly, making me feel watched, yet seeing no one. It was all too real, though, and despite returning to that spot a few times since, nothing similar has happened. But the memory of that day lingers, a reminder of something unseen, always just beyond the edge of sight, waiting. That morning had started like any other. I woke up early, grabbed my coffee, and planned to check the farthest field, the one I rarely use. Last year, I had let it rest, planning just to mow down the weeds before summer. Stepping outside, the air was cool yet sticky from the previous day. The house was quiet, filled with the usual shadows and creaks, enveloped in the kind of silence that precedes the day's beginnings. With my flashlight in hand and keys jangling, I walked out to the truck. I drove for about 10 minutes along a gravel road, winding past old barns and wooded patches, under a low, cloud-covered moon that shed a pale light. Parking at the field's edge, I stepped out into air scented with earth, grass, and a faint sweetness, perhaps wildflowers. As I walked towards the field's back corner, where the grass grew thick and wild, something unusual caught my eye. Initially, it seemed like burn marks or old tire tracks, but on closer inspection, it was a huge, perfectly circular shape, about 30 feet across, pressed into the grass and weeds. The edges were sharply defined, as if cut with scissors, with every plant inside the circle flattened perfectly, not a stem out of place. I circled it twice, shining my flashlight over it, trying to find any sign of disturbance, footprints, tire marks, anything. But there was nothing. The surrounding soil was untouched, no trails leading in or out. I considered the possibility of a prank or some kid's project, but the field's isolation and the undisturbed dewy grass around it made that unlikely. The precision of the circle's shape puzzled me. It seemed too perfect for a natural cause like wind or rain. Touching the grass, I found it wasn't dry or brittle, but rather gently pressed down, still firmly holding its shape. I stood up, the clouds breaking slightly to reveal a few stars, and the moon nearly gone. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen fizzled to static and dimmed repeatedly, despite a full battery. Turning around slowly, the field behind me was pitch black. I thought I saw a shadow shifting at the tree line. I blinked and aimed my flashlight that way, but there was nothing. The only sound was a distant tractor somewhere else on the farm. As I walked back, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder at the circle, faintly visible in the moonlight and seemingly glowing for a moment. Back at my truck, my hands were sweaty, and I sat staring out at the field, the circle now hard to see. I called my neighbor Dave to see if he'd noticed anything odd while out checking fences, but he hadn't. Hesitant to mention the circle, I kept quiet, unsure if I was just seeing things. Driving back home, I caught a glimpse of a fleeting white light in the rearview mirror, near the edge of the field. It disappeared before I could get a good look. That night, sleep eluded me. My mind kept circling back to the oddity in the field, where the grass had been pressed down into a perfect circle, with no tracks or any signs explaining how it was made. Throughout the night, I found myself getting up to peer out the window, but the field remained engulfed in darkness, with only the stars piercing through the night sky. The next morning, curiosity got the best of me, and a couple of friends from town. We returned to the site. The grass was still flattened, the edges of the circle sharp and precise. Despite our thorough search for any footprints or signs of disturbance, the ground was dry and untouched. One friend mentioned a faint smell reminiscent of ozone or burnt rubber, but I didn't catch it. We tossed around jokes about aliens and crop circles. I didn't find it funny, though. The formation was too neat, too deliberate, compared to the chaotic depictions on TV. Later that day, during a run to town for supplies, I stopped by the feed store. The clerk there brought up some strange lights seen the previous night over the county line. I kept quiet about the circle. Back home, I inspected the field again. The circle remained unchanged, as if the grass had been freshly flattened and then frozen in time. In the days that followed, I made frequent visits to the field, trying to uncover any clue about what had created the circle. Occasionally, I'd hear faint hums or soft crackles, but they'd vanish as soon as I paused to listen. One night, I even set up a camera aimed at the circle, hoping to catch something. By morning, the memory card was mysteriously gone. I scoured the field, the surrounding trees, the dirt road, nothing. The camera was still in place, but the card slot was empty. That same night, I spotted a dim light moving in the distance, just beyond the tree line. I chased after it with my flashlight, but it disappeared before I could get close. No sound, no trace of anyone. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. Some nights, my phone would lose signal entirely when I was near the field, a place where I'd usually get at least a weak signal. Other times, the stars seemed unusually bright and sharp, as if the sky itself had changed. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just stress from the farm work. But then my watch started acting up, showing 3 a.m. when I was sure it was noon. Even after resetting it, the issue persisted the next day with different times. I brought it up with some locals at the diner, curious if they too had noticed any bizarre shifts in time or strange lights. While some laughed it off, others blamed the old, glitchy power grid. No one mentioned anything about crop circles. As the week wore on, the mystery only deepened. It was about 3 weeks ago when Anna and I, just after finishing dinner, were relaxing on the back porch of my house, which is nestled on the outskirts of town. The area is generally serene, only disrupted by the outline of a hill about 2 miles away. The hill is mostly barren, except for some trees and a radio tower topped the blinking red light, or so we thought. Around 10:15 p.m., as I was getting ready to head inside, Anna's voice stopped me. "Do you see that light over there?" she asked, pointing towards the hill. I looked and noticed a small light near the summit, flickering slowly in a pattern that was unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was the usual tower light, but this one was different. It wasn't blinking rapidly, but pulsing slowly in threes, then pausing before repeating the sequence. We watched it for several minutes. The light was soft, almost like a dim beacon, pulsing deliberately in a pattern that seemed intentional. There was no other light on the tower, just that single faint glow. Intrigued, we started to monitor it every night. The pattern was consistent. 3 slow pulses, a pause, then 3 more, always at the same time, around 10:15 p.m., regardless of the weather or moon phase. Curiosity got the better of me a few nights later, and I grabbed my binoculars. Through them, the light didn't resemble a beacon but appeared more like a soft orb hovering just above the treetops. It was stationary, peculiar, and nothing like I had seen before. One evening, driven by curiosity, I headed out to the field where this phenomenon occurred. It was dusk, the sky gradually darkening and the air dense with moisture. As I approached, the circle in the field seemed unusually dark, as if it were swallowing the light around it rather than reflecting it. Standing at its center, a sudden chill enveloped me, despite the still air. It felt as though a breeze had whipped through suddenly. I decided to leave, but the silence around felt heavy, almost as if I was being watched. Just then, at the edge of the circle, I noticed a shadow dart between 2 trees. I called out, but there was no response, only the wind echoed back. I hurried back to my truck and started to drive home. Oddly on the road, my headlights flickered, and the dashboard went completely dark for a moment before everything flickered back to normal, as if nothing had happened. By the time I reached home, the sky was pitch black, peppered with stars. I locked up and sat inside, pondering over the field and the dark circle. I couldn't figure out what had created it or why it was there. It seemed like no one else had noticed it. The circle remains out there, silent and flattened. Sometimes, when the conditions are just right, late at night with the wind gently blowing, I can hear a faint, unusual hum emanating from that far corner of the field, adding to the mystery of it all. I tried to convince myself that the strange light I kept seeing was just some odd reflection or a trick of the eye. It appeared every night right on time, lasting about a minute before it vanished. Anna suggested one night that I should capture it on video. Equipped with my DSLR and its zoom lens, I aimed at the hill and recorded the light as it pulsed 3 times and then faded. Reviewing the footage, we noticed the light had unusually sharp edges, no blurs or distortion, which seemed odd considering its distance and flickering nature. Curious to get a closer look, Anna and I drove to the hill a few nights later. We parked at the base and walked up the path leading to the top, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The woods around us were silent, apart from the occasional rustle of leaves. As we climbed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, constantly looking back, expecting to see someone following us. The trees cast eerie, flickering shadows, but we saw no signs of any creatures or people. Reaching a clearing halfway up, we stopped and looked down at the town lights. The sky was clear, the air still. The light on the summit was off. After waiting around 20 minutes, at exactly 10:15 p.m., the light reappeared, emitting 3 slow pulses just like before. Suddenly, the air turned colder, and Na looked as shaken as I felt. That's when we saw another light, faint and steady, closer to the trees down the hill. It didn't pulse like the other. It just glowed softly, barely visible like a dim star through the branches. We stood frozen, not speaking. After the 3 pulses ceased, the lower light lingered for a few minutes before it too disappeared. The sensation of being watched became too intense. I thought I saw a shadow moving near the tree line, too large to be an animal, but it was gone before I could focus. We hurried back to the car, neither of us speaking, both unsettled by the experience. Over the following week, we watched the hill from our porch. The main light continued its pattern of 3 pulses, but the second light appeared sporadically, sometimes before or after the main pulses, other times not at all. One night, driven by a need to understand, I went up the hill again by myself. I parked at the end of the dirt road and walked the rest of the way. The hill was steep, the path slippery in spots. As I climbed with only my flashlight and camera for company, the eerie quiet of the woods enveloped me once more. Late November found me hunting alone near Red Pines, a vast expanse of public land in the Northwoods filled with thick trees, old logging roads, and deer trails weaving through. Unlike previous trips where I had company, this time it was just me. I arrived just after sunrise and parked off a side road, hiking a few miles into the forest to distance myself from other hunters. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the wind, my breath, and the crunch of frozen ground beneath my boots. That morning, although I saw no deer, I stumbled upon fresh tracks and decided to follow them deeper into the woods. Using just a paper map and a compass, embracing the traditional way of navigation, I wasn't concerned about losing my way. Around mid-morning, I paused for a snack and sat on a fallen log. That's when I noticed something odd, my own boot prints in the dirt nearby. At first, I thought I might have circled back accidentally, but after checking my compass and the position of the sun, it was clear I was still headed northeast. On the ascent, the ground was blanketed with fallen leaves. Halfway up, a faint, constant humming, reminiscent of electricity, filled the air. The sensation made the hairs on my arms stand on end, prompting me to stop and scan the woods with my flashlight. Abruptly, the humming ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. Ahead, the trees gave way to a small plateau dotted with rocks and patches of grass. Shining my light around, I felt an eerie sense of being watched from the shadows. Then, the light pulses began again, glowing through the trees from the summit. Initially, I thought they emanated from the tower, but it was dark. The pulsing light was coming from somewhere beyond the tree line, in an area unreachable by paths. I tried to call Anna on my phone, but there was no signal. The air was cold, my breath visible, and I felt increasingly exposed. As I retreated, I thought I heard quick, light footsteps behind me, but turning around, I found nothing. The next day, I shared the experience with Anna. She admitted feeling a similar eerie presence during our last visit. We decided to avoid returning to the hill. A few days later, I checked the local news. Nothing unusual reported, just typical weather and events. However, the light continued to appear nightly in the same pattern. Sometimes, from my window, I'd find myself waiting for those 3 pulses, pondering their meaning or origin. I wondered if anyone else noticed them, or if they signified anything. Occasionally, late at night, I'd hear that faint humming again, as if the hill itself was alive and observing. As I walked through the woods, everything seemed normal at first, but soon a strange feeling crept up on me. Despite the familiar trees, I felt like someone was watching me. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just the solitude getting to me. About half an hour later, I climbed a low ridge to check my surroundings. From the top, I noticed a small clearing below and spotted my footprints curving through the snow along its edge, forming a large arc. This caught my attention, so I walked down for a closer look. To my surprise, I realized I was following my own tracks. The tread pattern, the spacing, and even the slight drag in my right heel were unmistakable. Kneeling down, I saw that the impressions were fresh, with no snow or frost on them, indicating they were made within the last hour. Confused, I knew I hadn't turned back. Checking my compass, which still pointed northeast, I retraced my steps about 20 yards and noticed that the new trail merged seamlessly back into the one I was following. It was as if I had walked in a giant loop without realizing it. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe the terrain had subtly curved, or I had misread my compass earlier. But I was attentive and had been following game trails in what seemed like a mostly straight line. Deciding it was best to head back to my car, I marked a tree with orange flagging tape to help track my route. However, about an hour later, I passed the same marked tree again. The realization that I had somehow circled back to the same spot made me nervous. Everything, my map, my compass, confirmed I was now heading west towards the road, but somehow I had ended up where I started. I would have noticed if I had backtracked. The forest was eerily quiet, with no signs of animals or birds, just a dead silence. Then I heard crunching footsteps in the snow behind me. I spun around quickly, rifle in hand, but saw nothing but the empty woods. I called out, thinking perhaps another hunter was nearby, but got no response. The sound didn't resume. I stood there for a while, scanning the tree line, but it remained still. With the daylight fading and the sun setting, I picked up my pace, hoping to hit the road soon. But as the light dimmed, I saw something unusual up ahead. A steady, pale glint of light through the trees, not bright but constant. As I approached cautiously, I saw 3 soft white lights in a straight line hovering low, about 50 yards away, right above the ground, like someone holding a flashlight sideways. They were motionless, not flickering or bobbing. I crouched behind a stump to watch. The woods were silent, and the lights just hung there, about 5 or 6 feet off the ground. I sat watching for what felt like minutes until, without warning, the lights suddenly went out all at once. I started walking again, slower this time, sticking close to trees. Feeling completely disoriented, every part of the forest looked identical. The trees, every dip in the land. At one point, I noticed another set of boot prints, identical to mine, not crossing my path but running parallel, as if another version of me was walking just off to the side. I followed these tracks for a few minutes. They matched mine perfectly, even the worn patch on the heel. Then abruptly, they stopped. No fading, no turning around, just an abrupt end mid-step with fresh snow around them, untouched. That empty space where the next footstep should have been really unnerved me. I turned back, heading towards what I thought was the direction of the road, walking fast, no longer trying to move quietly. I just wanted to get out. As the sun was setting and the air turned colder, it felt like forever before I heard the faint hum of a car engine in the distance. I pushed on towards the sound and eventually saw the road through the trees. My truck was right where I'd left it. I didn't look back, just got in, started the engine, and drove home. Once home, I tried to make sense of my route on a map. No matter how I plotted it, the loop didn't make sense. I shouldn't have ended up where I did, especially not twice, without realizing I had turned. Months later, I went back with a friend. We stayed near the road, didn't see anything unusual, and I didn't mention my previous experience. I haven't been back since. On a different day, I was at Glenhurst Station around 6:40 p.m., waiting for my train home from work. It was early March, still chilly, but the days were getting longer, casting a dim, bluish light in the sky. The platform wasn't crowded, with people scattered about, mostly engrossed in their phones or listening to music. I looked down the tracks out of habit, not because I heard the train. It was still minutes away. That's when I saw it. Hovering about 20 or 30 feet above the tracks, it appeared suddenly as if it had always been there, and I just hadn't noticed. It wasn't a drone. I know what drones look and sound like, and this was different. It made no sound, didn't wobble or move. It was shaped oddly, kind of like a stretched-out egg standing upright, almost transparent. It looked like something distorting the air around it, with a faint, pulsing shimmer around the edges, not glowing, just a subtle brightness. I was checking out the scene around me when I noticed a woman close by, staring intently at something, her mouth slightly open in awe. At that moment, another guy with a backpack joined us and did a double take, clearly shocked by what he was seeing. The woman whispered to me, "Do you see that?" I could only nod in response. Together, we just stood there, silently observing. The object remained still, completely silent, and gave off an unsettling vibe, as if it was there but also not. It's hard to explain. Then, a man in a suit a little down the platform started filming with his phone, and soon, several others followed suit. Curious, I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and zoomed in, but to my surprise, the screen showed nothing but the tracks and the sky. The object, or whatever it was, had vanished from my viewfinder. I thought I was missing something, wiped my lens, switched to video mode, but still, nothing. It seemed like the camera just couldn't capture it. Glancing over, I saw the man in the suit frowning at his phone. The woman next to me tried her camera too and turned to me, puzzled. "You're not seeing it on yours, right?" she asked. "No," I replied. "It's not showing up." "Mine either," she confirmed. The guy with the backpack blurted out, "What the hell is that thing?" I had no answers. We continued to watch the unmoving shape. It felt like we stood there for ages, though it was probably only a few minutes. More people started to notice, and a hush fell over the platform as if everyone was questioning their sanity or the reality of what they were seeing. Then, breaking the silence, someone shouted, "Okay, does anyone else see like a floating jelly bean with a halo around it?" Instantly, 3 people confirmed they did. The consensus was bizarre. Everyone described it similarly, an egg-shaped jelly bean, shimmering, with a wobbling aura. No one thought it was a drone, a balloon, or even a reflection. A few tried to get a closer look by walking down the platform, not directly underneath it, but the object didn't react. It stayed perfectly still. Suddenly, as if someone flipped a switch, the object disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next gone. No sound, no trace. Everyone froze, probably waiting for it to reappear. But then, the train came, right on schedule, as if nothing unusual had happened. Some people boarded the train, others stayed back, fixated on the spot where the object had been. I got on the train, more out of habit than anything, and so did the woman who had been standing next to me. We sat across from each other. After a couple of stops, I leaned forward and asked, "Did that just go away?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, like a light switch." The guy next to her chimed in, "I took a dozen photos, and there's nothing on any of them, just empty sky." I checked my phone again. All my photos were the same. I even tried editing them to enhance the contrast, but nothing showed up. However, I clearly remembered where it had been. I even held up my phone, lined up the spot, and compared it to my picture. That evening, the train ride home was unusually quiet. Everyone seemed on edge, barely speaking. Later, curious if anyone else had noticed anything odd, I searched local news websites. Nothing. So I posted on a commuter forum, vaguely mentioning something strange over the tracks, not getting into specifics. To my surprise, 3 people replied. They were at Glenhurst and described seeing exactly what I had: a jelly bean-shaped, transparent object floating silently above the tracks. None had photos. One guy thought he captured a video, but it was just 30 seconds of an empty sky. The following evening, I returned early to the same spot, hopeful yet skeptical. The platform was bustling with the usual crowd, the cold wind mingling with the sound of approaching trains. Nothing unusual appeared. I continued this routine for a few days, each time scanning the sky a bit longer, but the mysterious object didn't show up again. Then, on the 4th day, I noticed a man further down the platform. He wasn't distracted by his phone or checking his watch, just staring straight ahead. When he glanced at me, there was a silent acknowledgement, as if we were both there searching for answers. We boarded the train without a word. For years, I've used a spot behind my house for stargazing. It's nothing fancy, just a fold-out lawn chair, a telescope on a cheap tripod, and an old thermos of coffee. The area is ideal, with minimal light pollution and clear views that even showcase parts of the Milky Way. I'm no professional, but I enjoy sketching constellations and logging satellites, occasionally catching meteor showers. It all began in early September, which I remember because it was just getting cool enough to wear a hoodie again. Around 10:30 one night, while aiming my telescope toward Cassiopeia, I noticed something odd. A star at the bottom of the constellation's W shape was pulsing faintly, unlike the typical flickering caused by atmospheric distortion. It was a rhythmic, slow strobe that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking closely. I was sketching at the time, and it threw off my star placements. Initially, I thought it might be a plane, but it was stationary, just sitting there between flickers. Curious, I marked it with a question mark in my notes and moved on. The next night, at the same time, I checked again. The flickering star was still there, unchanged in brightness, but slightly shifted in position. I thought I had made a mistake when I first noticed that one of the stars wasn't in its usual spot from the night before. I double-checked my previous sketches, and sure enough, the star had moved slightly. It was subtle, but noticeable to someone paying close attention. For the next 20 minutes, I kept my eyes on it, but it stayed put, only flickering in a way that didn't match anything else in the sky. By the third night, I automatically searched for it first. It had drifted further, still near Cassiopeia, but now just outside one of its main arms. I scoured satellite maps and flight paths, even amateur astronomy forums, but nothing lined up. There was no satellite that lingered in one place like that. And it definitely wasn't behaving like a typical star, which wouldn't move that perceptibly over just 3 days. The behavior of this object became more intriguing around the 5th or 6th night. Its movement was deliberate, shifting in the same direction and by roughly the same amount each night. It started to feel weird, almost like it was tracking something with a purpose across the sky. I shared this with my friend Tom, who's a big astronomy buff. He joined me on the 7th night, armed with his binoculars, and was just as baffled. "It's not a plane," he observed, "and that flicker, it's too clean to be twinkling." We continued to monitor it together. It persisted in its slow drift and consistent flicker. Then one night, it just stopped moving, as if it was waiting for something. That was the same night my telescope began acting up. Everything else in the view was clear, but when I aimed at that spot, the image went soft, not blurry, but as if the lens refused to focus. Tom's binoculars still worked, but even he remarked that something seemed off, like it wasn't quite there, but hidden behind something else. I even tried to capture it with my phone through the telescope, but all I got was a black sky, the phone failing to pick up anything in that spot. We decided to take a break for a few days, maybe to clear our heads. But when I returned mid-month, the object had moved out of Cassiopeia entirely. That's when something new started happening. Around 3 a.m., sometimes later, I began noticing a faint streak of light, a silent, slow-moving arc that didn't resemble a meteor. It didn't burn out, but seemed more like a shadow passing under the stars. It reminded me of how a bird's silhouette might pass in front of a streetlight, only much higher and silent. I saw this mysterious streak about 3 times over 2 weeks, always in the same part of the sky, always between 2 and 4 a.m. After witnessing it for the 3rd time, I realized that whatever I was observing was unlike anything typical in the night sky. So I'm usually up late trying to snap pictures of the stars. It's a hobby. Night photography and amateur astronomy really fascinate me. On this one crystal clear night, the conditions were just perfect for stargazing. I had my tripod all set up in the backyard, shooting the sky from just after midnight until around 2 in the morning. It was peaceful, just the distant hum of cars and the rustle of leaves around me. I felt alone, but in that comforting, serene way that only a quiet night can offer. The next day, I uploaded the night's haul onto my computer. Most of the photos were typical, sharp pinpoints of light, recognizable constellations, even the occasional satellite streaking by as a tiny line. However, something strange caught my eye in the photos taken between midnight and 2. Each one had this blurry, triangular shape, sort of a smudgy shadow either near the center or slightly off to one side. It was consistently there, not moving much, just looming subtly in each shot. The thing had a weird color too, a dull gray with a soft glow around the edges, totally unlike any lens flare or camera artifact I'd ever seen. Thinking it might be a glitch with my camera, I meticulously cleaned the lens and checked the settings. I even ran some test shots during the day, and at sunset, nothing out of the ordinary appeared. Yet, when I set up again the next night, aiming to capture the same part of the sky during the same time interval, that blurry triangle showed up in the photos once more. Around this time, I noticed something odd in my backyard during the night. The motion light, which faces out towards the field, started flicking on at random, usually around the same hours each night. Initially, I figured it might be animals like raccoons or deer triggering it, but a quick check revealed no movement, no sound, nothing. One night, curious and a bit unnerved, I sat outside with the light unplugged. Around 3:15 a.m., I saw it again, a flicker, but this time it was closer, about 100 feet off the ground, not up in the sky. It was just a faint, soft pulse of light, hovering silently for about 10 seconds before it faded away. I kept this too, myself, didn't even mention it to Tom or anyone else. After that encounter, I steered clear of going out at night for a while. When I finally ventured back weeks later, the mysterious light, or star, or whatever it was, had completely vanished. That part of the sky looked different too, oddly empty, making my eyes almost want to skip over it. Despite buying a better telescope and frequently checking, I never saw anything like it again. Yet, sometimes, my motion light still flickers on around 3 a.m., especially on clear nights. As I was outside that night, the silence of the neighborhood struck me first. There were no barking dogs or the usual distant hum of traffic, just an eerie, unnatural quiet that settled around me. The air felt heavy, as if something was lurking just beyond view. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though no obvious signs pointed to anyone hiding in the shadows. While I tried to brush off the sensation, I found myself glancing around nervously a few times. My phone was on silent, ensuring no distractions, with only the occasional click of my camera shutter and the faint buzz from my laptop inside breaking the stillness. Then, subtly at first, I began to hear a faint, mechanical clicking sound. It was soft, buried in the background noise of the night, rhythmic and metallic, almost like a clock ticking. I tried pinpointing the sound, but it was neither growing louder nor fading away. It just persisted steadily in the background. For about 15 minutes this went on, and I rationalized it might just be a machine, perhaps a generator in a neighbor's yard or a distant radio tower. Yet, it felt out of place in the pervasive silence. After a while, curiosity got the better of me, and I put down the camera and headed back inside. Checking the photos on my computer, I noticed the same triangle shape appearing in every shot from that particular time window. It puzzled me because when I was outside on the third night, this time with binoculars instead of my camera, I couldn't see the triangle shape with the naked eye or through the lenses. The stars looked normal. There were no blinking lights or moving shapes. Inside, after observing the sky, the feeling of something nearby, an invisible presence, lingered. It felt as if it was hanging just above the treetops, watching. Upon checking my phone, I found new notifications, messages from unknown numbers containing strange symbols, like scrambled letters or codes. I deleted these, dismissing them as spam, but then another message arrived, an audio file. No text, just this file. Listening to it, I first heard static, then that same faint clicking I had heard outside, and chillingly, a whisper in my own voice, uttering a word in what seemed like an unknown language. It was a soft, breathy syllable, unrecognizable and unsettling. I checked my phone logs. There were no records of calls or recordings around that time. I hadn't spoken to anyone for hours, nor had I used any apps that could have recorded sound. Puzzled, I wondered if I was losing track of time or experiencing some sort of waking dream. But everything else about the night was clear. Only brief moments eluded my memory, leaving me to question what I was doing during those times. I was working the night shift as a security guard at a small industrial park on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet at night, mostly empty, except for a few warehouses, a couple of offices, and a fenced-off lot. Since the company was understaffed, it was often just me from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., driving around every hour to check the doors and fences, making sure everything was secure. The radios we used were old and basic, mostly just crackling with static or occasionally a check-in from the day crew or other guards. One night, things started to get weird. It was my third round, and I was cruising the lot in the company truck when the radio buzzed to life. It wasn't the usual beep or short burst. It was faint, almost like a whisper. I turned up the volume, thinking maybe another guard was trying to call in, but the voice was soft and muffled, buried in static. I said hello into my radio, expecting some reply, but got nothing but static. I tried flipping through the frequencies, but there was only silence and more static. I was the only guard on duty that night. The schedule was clear on the break room wall. I wondered if the radio was picking up interference from CB radios, truckers on the nearby highway, or some random signal bouncing off the hills. The whispers kept coming back every few minutes, just soft breathing sounds, too quiet and jumbled to make out any words. I tried to focus on my job, walking the fence lines, checking the loading docks, the doors. Everything looked normal, but every time the radio crackled with those whispers, I felt a strange tension in my chest, as if someone was nearby, watching me, but staying just out of sight. On my fourth round, I parked the truck near one of the warehouses and stepped out to do a physical check of the back doors. The night was cool, and the area was mostly quiet. The next day, I went through the photos, messages, and a sound clip from the previous night, trying to connect the dots. There was a triangle shape in the pictures, a clicking sound, and a strange message on my phone. They all seemed tied together somehow, but there was no clear reason why. I thought about showing the photos to some friends, but hesitated. I wasn't sure they'd believe me. They might just think it was a camera glitch or some prank. After that night, the strange messages stopped. The clicking sound didn't come back, and the triangle shape disappeared from my photos. However, the feeling lingered, the sense that something was there, watching, just beyond what I could see. Sometimes, I still look up at the stars, camera ready, hoping to catch it again, but it hasn't shown up since. It was so quiet, the only thing I could hear was the distant hum of highway traffic, about a mile off. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. I could just make out a soft whisper, something like help or run, but I couldn't be sure. "Who's there?" I called into the radio, not really expecting an answer. Then, a branch snapped behind me. I whirled around, flashlight in hand, only to see the shadows of tall grass swaying and the dark silhouette of the warehouse looming in the background. The whispers started again, sending chills down my spine. I quickly climbed back into the truck and tried to call the main office with my cell phone, but I couldn't get a signal. No bars, no service. It wasn't unusual for this remote part of the park, but it did nothing to calm my nerves. The whispers on the radio were relentless, coming every few minutes, garbled and indistinct, as if someone was trying to speak through water. At one point, I thought I heard, "Can you hear me?" I stared at the radio, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. Hours passed, and the whispers grew into a constant, overlapping chatter, none of it making any sense. I tried turning the radio off and on, hoping to clear the static, but when I turned it back on, the static was worse, and the whispers louder. The air felt colder, heavier. Despite telling myself it was just a glitch, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I glanced nervously towards the tree line beyond the fence, but saw nothing. I attempted to reach my supervisor using the company radio frequency, but got no response. It felt like I was completely alone. The radio's screen started flickering, sometimes showing scrambled letters and numbers, sometimes going blank. The battery drained fast, even though it had been fully charged. I found myself watching the tree, shadows more than the buildings around me. The whispers morphed into faint breathing sounds mixed with static. Time seemed to crawl. I kept checking my watch, while the radio clock glitched, skipping seconds or freezing momentarily. I considered leaving, but I needed to finish my shift, and the highway was a good half-hour walk away. Finally, around 5 a.m., the whispering stopped, and the radio fell silent, save for the usual background static. I felt a slight relief, but the weight of the night still pressed heavily on me. I drove back to the main gate, double-checked the locks, and headed home as dawn was breaking. When I got inside, I tossed my keys. I was driving home late one Friday night along the usual quiet stretch of highway that connects the city with its outskirts. The road, mostly a two-lane affair flanked by trees and sporadically lit by a few streetlights, is one I prefer because it's peaceful, allowing me some quiet time with just the road after a late shift. Not in any rush, I was enjoying the drive when something unusual caught my attention near an old, shut-down gas station. There's this big digital billboard along that road, You know, the kind with bright LED numbers that show the time and temperature. Normally, it works just fine, but that night, the clock on the billboard kept glitching. It wasn't just flickering or going blank momentarily, as when there's a power surge. The numbers kept resetting, jumping back to 12 and then starting up again. This repeated several times, almost rhythmically. Each time the clock reset, a bright light streaked across the sky just above the treetops. At first, I thought it might be a plane or a meteor. It was a sharp, fast-moving streak of white light, unlike the slower motion of satellites or the blinking lights of an airplane. It appeared suddenly and was gone just as quickly, leaving me puzzled. What was odd was that the clock on the billboard seemed to glitch exactly when the light flashed overhead, as if the light was somehow triggering it. Curious, I pulled off to the shoulder to get a better look. It was a quiet night, with only the faint hum of the distant highway. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the stars, which seemed ordinary except for the periodic flash of light streaking across the sky every minute or so. I tried to use my phone to call someone, but strangely, I had no signal, which was unusual so close to town. My phone otherwise worked fine. I could browse through my messages and photos with no issues, but the clock glitches continued. Feeling a bit uneasy, I noticed something else peculiar. The trees near the billboard seemed darker than usual, as if they were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Staring into the darkness, I couldn't make out any distinct shapes or movements, just an unsettling void. Then, the clock reset once more, accompanied by another flash of light, and this time, a faint hum, like a low-frequency sound barely audible. Back home, I turned on the radio on the kitchen counter and left it untouched for the rest of the night. I'm still not sure what I experienced, whether it was interference from some unknown source or something else entirely. Yet, every time I think back to that night, I can't shake off the feeling of a nearby presence. Something just out of reach, listening, a sensation I can't quite explain. I was chilling in my car, trying to shake off a weird vibe. There was this vibration, you know? Not loud, but it definitely gave me the creeps, made the hairs on my neck stand up. I kept telling myself it was probably just some electrical glitch messing with the nearby billboard, or maybe a transformer going kaput. Something unrelated, for sure. Then everything went pitch black. The billboard's lights died, the trees were just silhouettes, and that humming noise, it got louder. Oddly enough, there were no other cars around, which was strange for a weekend night. After a minute or so of just sitting there in the dark and silence, the lights on the billboard flickered back on. But the time on it was stuck at midnight. I fired up the car and hit the road again, keeping an eye on the sky. No more weird flashes or humming. Checked my phone, and yep, the signal was back. The time corrected itself, and so did the billboard clock, ticking away like nothing weird had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling something odd had gone down, something that lasted maybe about 20 minutes. I kept looking back as I drove away, half expecting those weird flashes to light up the sky again, or something creepy to pop out from the trees. But nada. When I got home, I scoured the local news and checked the weather updates. Nothing. No reports of storms or power outages. Now, I still drive that road sometimes, and I glance at the billboard clock. It's always working just right. But every now and then, I swear I see a slight flicker, or feel that same eerie hum for just a second. Like it's all just waiting to happen again. Earlier that day, just after sunset, I was out in the woods trying to snap some pics of wildlife. I'm into photographing the usual stuff: birds, deer, squirrels. Nothing fancy. That evening, I had my regular camera gear plus my infrared camera, which is awesome for night shots because it picks up heat signatures. This lets you see animals moving in the dark, even if you can't spot them with the naked eye. The forest was dense, filled with thick pine trees and underbrush, and the trails were super quiet. Not many folks venture out there at night, but I dig the peace and darkness, just me and the sounds of the forest. I set up my gear in a small clearing about half a mile in. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, the sky still tinged with a faint orange glow. I had the infrared camera running, watching the screen for any signs of animals. About 20 minutes in, I spotted a few deer in the distance, their bodies glowing white on the IR screen. Just normal stuff. Then, something else caught my eye, near a cluster of trees about 50 yards away. In the dead of night, my infrared camera captured something bizarre in the forest, a perfectly round shape, moving slowly. Unlike typical heat signatures that glow on the IR spectrum, this one was pitch black, indicating it emitted no heat. It glided smoothly between the trees, not disrupting a single leaf or branch, which was eerie. Thinking it might be a camera glitch or just a shadow, I switched to regular night vision to double check. But with night vision, I couldn't see anything at all. No light, no mysterious shape, just the darkness of the forest. The circle continued to move at a steady pace, a couple of feet per second, weaving through the trees. It felt completely out of place, almost supernatural. I tried calling out, half expecting someone was pulling a prank or there was some hidden equipment. Only my echo replied. After about 5 minutes, the shape vanished into a denser part of the woods. Despite waiting and watching, it didn't reappear. I packed up, feeling uneasy as I headed back, sensing something or someone watching me. Occasionally, I noticed slight movements in my peripheral vision, but turning to look revealed nothing. Back home, I reviewed the footage. The black circle was there in every clip, silent and heatless. I racked my brain for a logical explanation, maybe a cold object or a piece of floating plastic, but nothing fit. It moved too deliberately, unaffected by the wind, sticking close to the ground. I've returned to that spot several times, usually around dusk. Each visit, the forest atmosphere feels denser, the air unnaturally cold. The sensation of being watched is persistent. I've spotted the circle again on these visits, behaving just as before, silent, heatless, and just as mysterious. The experience reminds me of that strange night right after we returned from Vermont. I had just switched off a podcast and was settling to sleep when I heard it. It started faint, like a distant truck, but it was a deep, low hum that I felt more than heard, vibrating through my chest. Initially, I thought our furnace might be acting up again. The windows started vibrating lightly as I sat up and noticed the bedroom window flexing slightly in its frame. My wife was already awake, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. "You hear that?" I whispered to her, and she just nodded. Without a word, I got out of bed and peered through the blinds. Outside, the backyard was engulfed in darkness. No wind stirring, no branches swaying, yet the hum grew stronger, enveloping the house. Suddenly, from down the hall, our son's voice cut through the quiet, "Dad?" I hurried to reassure him. It's probably just a plane or something, though the walls buzzed with a strange vibration. I promised to check on him soon and walked through the house. The living room, kitchen, everything was in place, but the sound persisted, its source indiscernible. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The ensuing silence felt unnaturally sharp, the air snapping back into place, my ears popping. My wife joined me in the hallway, her voice low. "What the hell was that?" I could only shake my head. I stepped out onto the front porch. It was eerily silent. No cars, no wind, not even the crickets dared to chirp. Our dog, normally so reactive, remained silent. At breakfast the next morning, we revisited the night's events. Our son likened the sound to a giant fridge hum floating over the house. Curious, I later checked our local Facebook groups and other social media for any mention of the noise. Loud noise, vibration, weird hum. Nothing turned up. It seemed implausible that no one else had heard it. The hum was far from subtle. That evening, I called Joe, our next-door neighbor. In his 70s and a retired electrician, he's usually observant, but he and his wife had been up late, absorbed in an old movie until nearly 3 a.m., and hadn't noticed anything unusual. I pushed a little, mentioning the loud hum and the shaking windows. He chuckled, suggesting perhaps I was dreaming. The following day, I asked the neighbors across the street. They too had nothing unusual to report. 3 nights later, it happened again. I was drifting off when I sensed a drop in pressure, like before a storm, and then the hum returned, the same low, deep tone, as if it was emanating from inside the walls. The windows trembled slightly, and this time, the hum fluctuated. My wife and I just sat up in bed, too uneasy to go outside, just listening. After about 40 seconds, it abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was exactly as before. I was walking back from the barn after turning off the lights around 11 p.m. It was a cool night with heavy dew on the grass, no wind, and just the distant buzz of grain dryers. As I approached the house, I glimpsed something odd in the sky. It was so dim I almost missed it. 3 faint lights forming a triangle, moving silently across the sky from west to east. They weren't bright or flashing. They looked like stars seen through a thin fog, moving smoothly in a straight line without changing direction or speed. I stopped and watched them until they disappeared behind the trees, leaving no trail or noise behind. The next morning, I checked our security cameras because something about the previous night felt off. We have 2 cameras, one above the garage and another facing the backyard. At 2:17 a.m., just 2 minutes before I checked my phone, the backyard camera picked up a brief glitch, a tiny flicker for just 1 frame. There was no sound, no lights, no visible movement. The front camera showed nothing out of the ordinary, no dropped footage or movement. I asked our son if he had heard anything that night. He mentioned hearing something return, but didn't get up. He just noticed the wall buzzing again. We decided to keep a notepad by our bed to jot down anything unusual. Nothing happened for a week, but then it came back. It was around the same time, the same sound. This time, I felt compelled to step out onto the porch. The air was heavy, still no wind, no bugs, and the hum was stronger outside. It felt like something was pressing down from above. I looked up but saw nothing, just the stars and barely moving clouds. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up there, too high and too quiet to see or track. Our dog came to the door, growling low and steady without barking, just staring out. Then, as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I've checked with neighbors, asked around at the school pickup line, and even at the gas station, but no one else seems to have noticed anything. People looked at me as if I were talking about a dream. I know what I heard, and what we experienced wasn't a plane, power lines, construction, or the bass from a car. It never showed up on the camera footage, but I still check it from time to time, just in case something appears that hadn't before. So far, nothing has. I didn't think much of it when they disappeared from the sky. Having seen plenty of odd things up there before, satellites, strange cloud reflections, even military planes on night exercises, I assumed it was something along those lines. After heading inside, I made some tea, hung out with my dog for a bit, and eventually went to bed. The next morning, like clockwork, I was up at 5:30. I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto the porch to savor a quiet moment before starting my day. The morning seemed normal at first glance. Fog draped over the back field, the sun peeking up. But something was off with the cows. Instead of gathering around the hay ring near the north fence like they usually do in the mornings, they were all the way at the far south end of the pasture, right up against the woods. At first, I thought maybe a coyote or some strange noise had spooked them. Walking closer, though, I saw they weren't moving around or grazing. They just stood there, silent and still, all lined up shoulder to shoulder along the fence, staring in the same direction toward the dense southeastern corner of the woods. They didn't make a sound, not even chewing. I paused at the gate, watching them for a few minutes. None of them turned their heads or shifted their stance. Even when I walked down the fence line, they didn't react. Usually, they'd at least flick their ears when I approached. But this time, clapping my hands barely got a couple of them to blink. Feeling like I was intruding on something, I held off going into the field. Instead, I decided to grab the ATV and drive around the perimeter, looking for anything that could have spooked them. Broken fence posts, tracks, anything. But the grass was untouched, with no prints, drag marks, or fence damage. Despite my inspection, the cows remained fixed in place all day. They had shifted slightly by lunchtime and again around dusk, with a few beginning to graze, but most maintained their odd, quiet vigil. That night, instead of going to bed, I sat on the porch with the lights off, keeping watch. Around 2:15 a.m., the dog growled, a low, steady sound from the back door, fixated on the field. I joined him, stepping outside to scan the clear starlit sky. I didn't see anything unusual at first, but then those same 3 faint points appeared again, arranged in a triangle, moving slowly from north to south, much lower than before, and without a sound or trail. I watched until they vanished, but the cows stayed near the same spot, as still and silent as before. The first thing that hit me when I woke up was the silence. It was an unusual kind of quiet, where you can't hear the wind rustling through the trees or birds chirping. Everything felt eerily still, like the air was thick and heavy. It had rained a lot during the night. The rain was so intense that I kept waking up, worried that water might seep through the seams of my tent. Around 2 or 3 a.m., the rain had tapered off to a soft tapping on the rainfly, and I fell back to sleep. When I unzipped my tent the next morning, I immediately felt that something was off. I expected to step out into mud and maybe find my camping stove knocked over by the wind. Instead, I found all my gear: my backpack, sleeping bag, camp stove, food bag, water bottles, boots, clothes, even the spare batteries, neatly arranged outside my tent. Everything was laid out in perfect rows, sorted by type and spaced out meticulously. My food was on one side, my folded clothes on another, and small items like lighters and a compass were in their own row. I stood there, half asleep, trying to piece together if I had done this bizarre organizing myself in some half-awakened state during the night. But I knew I hadn't. I never unzip my tent in the middle of the night, especially not when it's raining. The ground outside confirmed it had rained heavily. There were puddles and soft patches of mud. Yet there were no footprints, not mine or anyone else's. The mud around my neatly laid out gear was undisturbed, smooth as if no one had walked over it. Even the fabric of my sleeping bag was dry on top and only slightly damp on the underside, as if it had just been placed there. I looked around, trying to make sense of it all. My campsite was secluded, nestled between a bend in the trail and a small slope, with trees to the west and a creek to the east. I was 6 miles from the nearest road, with no other tents or sounds of people around. The last person I had seen was a couple hiking in the opposite direction the afternoon before. We had exchanged a simple hello. I checked my phone out of habit, but of course, there was no signal. Back at my farm, I had noticed something strange with my cattle. For 2 days, they refused to come up to the barn or eat much. When I tried to herd them, they scattered quickly, only to circle back to the same patch near the trees. On the third morning, I found one of the calves alone in the center of the field, just staring off toward the woods, in the same direction the others had been focused on. It seemed as if it had been left behind or had wandered out late. It didn't move for almost an hour, even when I approached. Eventually, everything went back to normal. The cattle started grazing again and returned to the barn for feed, acting as they usually did. However, they now completely avoid the southeast corner of the field, and I've stopped going out after dark. I walked the perimeter of the site, checking under the clothes and gear we'd laid out, hoping to find some clue. Despite the mud, there were no prints, not even where we'd disturbed the ground, laying everything down. Feeling unsettled, I returned to the tent. Inside, my sleeping pad, notebook, and headlamp were untouched, exactly where I'd left them by my pillow. That's when I realized the gravity of the situation. Someone or something had meticulously unpacked our gear, laid it out, and then zipped up the tent again without leaving any trace in the mud. Unable to shake off the eerie feeling, I decided not to eat or boil water. Instead, I sat on a log, watching the still trees in the silent, almost paused atmosphere. After some time, I began repacking. I was supposed to stay 2 more nights, but suddenly, the place didn't feel right. As I left, the campsite looked normal, except for a pocket knife from my pack, perfectly aligned at the edge of the clearing, untouched by mud or scratches. It seemed deliberately said, perhaps a message from whoever had moved my things. The trail was unnervingly quiet. No wind, no wildlife sounds, not even the crunch of leaves underfoot. It felt like walking through a sealed room. Gradually, the natural sounds returned. The wind, distant water, then birds, as if I was re-entering a world that had been on pause. Back at the trailhead, mine was the only car. I sat there before driving, not out of fear, but deep in thought about the incident. I never reported it, and for a long time, I didn't speak of it to anyone. Though nothing was missing and I was unharmed, I've never gone backpacking alone since then. I still hike and camp, but always with company and never near that trail. Driving back from my brother's in Franklin, I found myself on back roads around midnight. Familiar with the route and only occasionally seeing deer, I wasn't worried until a thick fog rolled in. It wasn't patchy, but dense and clinging, obscuring everything beyond the hood of my car. I slowed down, navigating through the visibility that had quickly diminished. I was driving down a particularly quiet stretch of road when suddenly the usual hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires just stopped. It was eerily silent, and even though I kept checking, my speed was normal. The headlights seemed to be swallowed up faster than usual by the darkness, which made me uneasy. As I was passing an old dairy farm, the one with the half-collapsed fencing and a leaning oak tree, the strangest thing happened. Out of nowhere, a blinding white light appeared right in front of my windshield. It wasn't a gradual brightening, but a sudden flood of light, as if I had driven straight into a wall-mounted floodlight. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes. The entire car was filled with this intense white light. I couldn't see the dashboard, my hands, or anything else. The light was dry and pressing, almost like being underwater, but without the wetness or warmth, and it was completely silent. I tried to look at my hand in front of my face, but saw nothing but white. I'm not sure how long it lasted. It could have been seconds or a whole minute, but then it disappeared as abruptly as it appeared, like flipping off a switch. Blinded momentarily, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, vulnerable and unable to see. When my vision returned, I looked around and saw nothing but darkness behind me, and just my low beams cutting through the dense fog ahead. The air inside the car felt heavy and stale, like it does when you've left the windows up all day in a parking lot. I rolled down a window to let in some fresh air, and the fog just poured in. Feeling unsure, but needing to move, I started driving again, though slower than before. The road felt different, as if it had changed while I was blinded by the light. I was certain I had missed a turn or something because the usual curve that came next seemed off. I even stopped to check Google Maps, which showed I was still on the right path on County Route 12, but everything felt wrong. Then, I spotted a billboard that I had never seen before. It was completely blank. No text, no images, just a stark white panel that looked oddly new. It hadn't weathered at all. Later, I checked and found that there had never been a billboard on that stretch of road. Nothing shown in any Street View history either. As I neared town, the fog lifted completely, as abruptly as it had appeared. It was clear by the time I reached the gas station stoplight. I got home just after 12:30, but when I checked the time, my car clock showed 12:34, while my phone and the microwave clock inside read 1:07. The weird part is, the drive, without stops or delays, should have only taken about 20 to 25 minutes. I didn't remember losing time, and I hadn't stopped for gas or been pulled over for more than a minute. 5 years ago in July, my cousin Gabe, his two friends, Ricky and Dan, and I decided to take a nighttime boat ride off the coast of Rhode Island. We were in Gabe's dad's 24-feet center console boat, not fishing, just cruising on the calm water under a starry sky with no moon. Far from shore, about 12 or 13 miles out, the coastline was barely visible, and it was incredibly quiet. We had turned off the boat's engine to just drift and enjoy the silence. I was half asleep near the bow when Gabe spotted something unusual near the stern and pointed it out. At first, none of us could see anything, but then Ricky noticed it too, about 100 yards away. The surface of the water had a strange dome-like rise, as if something was pushing up from beneath. It was smooth and silent, not like a wave or splash. Then a light appeared, dim and steady, shining through what looked like frosted glass, casting a pale blue or white glow that slowly got brighter. This object, maybe 20 to 30 feet high and about 10 to 15 feet wide, emerged from the water, not quickly but steadily, as if hoisted by an unseen crane. It wasn't a perfect shape, sort of an elongated oval that rotated slowly. The light it emitted was even not concentrated in any one spot, and it illuminated the water around it without reflecting like a typical spotlight. After a minute or so, the object submerged at the same slow pace, without a sound or splash, just as mysteriously as it had appeared. Another night, I was driving near a dairy farm on a road I knew well when I encountered something I couldn't explain. It wasn't foggy, and the skies were clear. As I approached a familiar curve, I noticed a light that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was so close it felt like it was inside the fog, though there was none. I tried to rationalize it, a security light, the high beams of a truck piercing through non-existent fog. but nothing made sense. A few days later, I drove the same road again at night. The conditions were the same, clear with no fog, but this time there was nothing out of the ordinary. Even the blank billboard that I remembered wasn't there, just an open field. I've driven that stretch many times since and never experienced the mysterious light or the odd half-hour time loss again. However, I've avoided that road in foggy conditions, opting for the highway instead, even if it takes an extra 15 minutes. It just doesn't seem worth the risk. After the thing submerged, the water just went calm, as if nothing had happened at all. We all sat there in silence for a while. It was Gabe who broke it, asking, "Did you guys all see that?" We all confirmed, quietly. No one was panicking or making a fuss. I think we were all just trying to process if what we saw was real. Dan fumbled for his phone, but he hadn't been recording. None of us had. It didn't seem like something you could capture on camera. The light on the water didn't look right, and the shape of the thing, it didn't throw shadows or have clear edges. We stayed out there, drifting for another half hour. Nothing surfaced again. There were no boats or planes, just the stars shining above the smooth sea. After a while, Gabe started the boat's engine, and we headed back. The ride was quiet. I kept glancing back at the water, just in case. Once we docked, Dan checked his phone again. He had tried to record some audio while the thing was still visible. When he played it back, all we heard was the wind and the creaks of the boat, no unusual sounds. Ricky mentioned he felt a vibration in his chest when it was above the water, like being near a big yet quiet speaker. The rest of us hadn't felt a thing. The next day, we talked it over again. No one had dreamed it up, and no one was drunk. We still didn't have any explanations. I've spent my life around boats, and I've never seen anything like that before, or since. On another occasion, I was hiking alone, to clear my head. I chose a quiet trail through a new forest area, about 2 hours from any town. It was just a simple loop, nothing but trees and dirt paths. My phone, which I'd been using for GPS, died a couple of hours in. Luckily, I had a backup handheld GPS. When I turned it on, the screen was fine, but the map was glitching, jumping between locations as if it was confused about where I was. This can happen in dense woods or deep valleys, but it was still odd. As I continued, I noticed that every time I passed through a particular clearing, the GPS would go haywire. It would freeze, flicker, then jump ahead or lag behind as if I was teleporting. At first, I thought it might be the device, or maybe something about the trees or underground was messing with the signal. It only happened in that clearing, though. I stopped there to rest, leaning against a tree and drinking some water. The sun was setting, dimming the light around me. I looked around. No garbage, no signs of other people, just the regular forest sights and sounds. I was working as a park ranger, stationed in a small cabin deep in the forest during a series of night shifts. Nights were long and cold, and except for the occasional daytime visitors like hikers or campers, I was usually alone. It was a typical quiet night, the kind where the darkness feels oppressive. Around midnight, I started hearing a faint tapping sound outside the cabin. It wasn't loud, just a couple of taps every few seconds, rhythmic and steady, like someone was knocking on wood or tapping a branch. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a woodpecker or a raccoon, but it was too regular, almost mechanical in its consistency. I looked outside but saw only the dark shapes of trees and no sign of any movement. The next day, on a routine patrol, something odd caught my attention. I spotted large footprints in the soft dirt, about a size 11 or 12, looking fresh and clear. These weren't ordinary. They led into a clearing, but strangely didn't exit it. It was as if someone had walked in and simply disappeared. I examined the area to see if leaves or debris had covered the trail leading out, but found nothing. The footprints themselves were bizarre. The toes were unusually long and thin, and the heels were almost triangular, much wider than normal. Initially, I wondered if it might be an unusual animal track, but it was too large for any typical forest creature and didn't match any known animal prints. The forest's silence that day felt unnatural, as if it was holding its breath. Despite feeling uneasy, I continued my patrol, but my GPS started acting up every time I passed through the clearing. It would freeze or jump around before returning to normal. This happened each time I looped back through that same spot. No other hikers or campers were seen all day, just me and those mysterious footprints that came into the clearing but never went out. By the evening, when I returned to my car, I was still puzzled by the day's events. The unexplained footprints, the GPS malfunctions confined to that specific area. I searched online for any similar reports or unusual occurrences in that forest, but found nothing. No missing persons, no strange phenomena. The experience lingered in my mind, especially the eerie footprints and the GPS glitches, as though something about that spot didn't want me there. It was subtle, just a glitch in the system and tracks that led to nowhere. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. I was outside with my flashlight, scanning the area, but there was nothing. No squirrels, birds, or any weird insects that could explain the tapping sound I kept hearing. The ground was dry since it hadn't rained for days, ruling out the possibility of dripping water. As I circled the cabin a couple of times, I shone my light into the woods, trying to locate the source of the noise. It was elusive, seeming to shift from left to right, always remaining just beyond the reach of my flashlight, without making any other sound. At first, I thought it might be someone playing a prank. I looked for any signs of a visitor, like footprints or broken branches, but come morning, I found the ground untouched, with no tracks or signs of any animals or humans. The tapping continued all night. It wasn't loud, but it was constant enough to keep me awake, pulling me back every time I started to drift off. I even found myself repeatedly checking the window, half expecting to see something, but there was only the dark forest. During the night, the rhythm of the tapping changed for a brief moment. It sped up and then slowed down before returning to its original pace. It was a subtle change, but it made me feel like whatever was making the noise knew I was listening. That night, the forest was eerily silent. No birds, no animals, and not even the wind made a sound. It was just that strange, isolated tapping. When daylight broke, I went out to check the area again. I followed a trail that led a few hundred feet into the trees, looking for any clue, but found nothing. No footprints, no marks on the trees, no signs of anything out of the ordinary. I wondered if I was just imagining things, or if the sound was something so normal that I couldn't identify it. But I had never heard anything like it before or since, and if it had been an animal or a bird, surely someone else would have noticed it too? Yet, no one ever reported anything similar in the park. The tapping never returned after that night. I kept checking around the cabin, listening intently, but it was as if the sound was there just for that one night. I still don't know what made the sound or why it seemed so focused on my cabin. It felt intentional, as if something wanted to get my attention without revealing itself. Even now, back home, in the stillness of the night, I sometimes think I hear a faint tapping in the distance. On a fishing trip by myself, I headed to a remote area I'd been to before, though never alone. I enjoy the peace and quiet, away from the hustle and bustle and constant connectivity of daily life. This time, it was just supposed to be me, the lake, and a couple days of fishing and camping. I arrived just before sunset and set up camp on a small peninsula jutting into the lake, surrounded by dense woods and calm waters, ideal for fishing. Cell reception was virtually non-existent, which I prefer. After setting up, I checked my compass, planning for a short hike the next day, but noticed something odd immediately. The needle started spinning wildly, not just twitching, but making full circles. I hadn't mishandled it, and it had always been reliable. Then, a low, humming sound began. It was like a deep vibration, similar to a distant engine, but smoother and steadier. The humming and the spinning compass needle continued for a minute or two, then stopped abruptly. The compass needle snapped back to pointing north. The sudden silence was striking. No birds, no insects, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Despite the weirdness, I tried to shrug it off as a magnetic anomaly or a glitch with the compass and went back to fishing. However, the incident left a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off. That evening, sitting by the fire under a clear sky filled with stars, I couldn't stop thinking about the earlier events. Then I noticed a faint, steady glow across the lake, hovering just above the ground. It wasn't a flashlight or a campfire, just a soft white light. Through my binoculars, it looked hazy and didn't move, making it hard to focus. I thought it might be a reflection or an animal's eyes, but but turning off my fire confirmed it wasn't related to my campsite. The light remained constant. I tried to sleep, but it was restless. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to that same low hum, louder than before, still just a deep, steady vibration. I lay there, listening and wondering, unable to return to sleep easily. I work overnight security at a pretty big, mostly empty office park just outside the city. It's usually really quiet after hours, with long empty parking lots and buildings all locked up. Most nights I hear nothing but distant traffic and see the occasional flicker of a street lamp. But one night, something odd happened that I still can't quite explain. Around 2:30 a.m., I was watching the usual screens showing empty lots and locked doors when I noticed something on the security camera on the west side of the property. There was a small, bright orb, glowing white and moving slowly across the deserted parking lot. At first, I thought it might be a drone or someone pulling a prank with a flashlight, but there was no sound and it didn't move like anything familiar. The orb just floated smoothly from one side to the other, not blinking or seeming mechanical at all. I zoomed in on the camera feed for a closer look. It didn't cast a shadow, reflect off any cars, or disturb the environment around it. No leaves stirred, no wind rose, it was just there. I checked my watch. The time was exactly 3:07. The compass I had left on the ground by my sleeping bag caught my eye, its needle spinning full circles just like before. A hum filled the air, lasting about 5 minutes before stopping abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The needle of the compass snapped to north, and the hum disappeared. The silence that followed felt denser than before, and inside my head, my breathing sounded unusually loud. When I looked outside, the mysterious glow across the lake had vanished. There were no movements, no lights, no shapes, nothing. The next morning, I packed up, ready to leave that strange night behind. I was looking forward to getting back to a place with normal sounds, normal everything. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the road behind me, half expecting to see something unusual, but there was nothing, just empty highway and trees. The whole experience felt like a dream, or perhaps something I imagined from being tired and alone. I've thought about it a lot since then, and honestly, I still don't have any answers. The spinning compass with the hum, the strange light on the shore, the silence that followed, it all felt like something was there, watching or just passing through, but never close enough to reveal itself. I kept the compass, by the way. It still works fine, but now and then, usually when I'm somewhere quiet and alone, I hear that faint hum again. When it happens, the needle starts to twitch, just a little, as if it's waiting to start spinning once more. I thought about telling someone about the compass and the humming, but it sounded ridiculous even to me. Before putting it away, I double-checked the compass one more time. It worked fine, pointing north as it should. I was out riding my bike late one night, a routine I often enjoyed for the way the empty, calm streets felt after midnight, almost as if the world was taking a breath. The air was cool, and the roads were mostly deserted, a perfect setting for a peaceful ride to clear my head. About 10 miles in, I noticed some lights. At first glance, they seemed like distant headlights, faint but steady, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I kept riding, something odd happened. I was watching a thermal camera overlay, trying to find clues about what I was seeing. That's when things took a strange turn. The orb of light moving slowly across the screen wasn't showing up on thermal imaging. Usually, anything bright has some heat signature, a car's headlights, a flashlight beam, or even a person's body heat. Yet this orb was completely invisible thermally. No heat, no disturbance, just a pure glowing light. It felt bizarre, staring at something so bright yet undetectable by the camera's heat sensor. The orb continued drifting like a balloon caught in a breeze, but the air around showed no thermal changes, no heat pockets or warm currents. Then, suddenly, it disappeared. It was as if someone flipped off a switch and the light just blinked out. I immediately checked the surrounding cameras to see if they caught anything else unusual, other lights, shadows, or any movement. Nothing. It was as if the orb was the only anomaly in an otherwise normal setting. Rewinding the footage multiple times revealed nothing that could explain the occurrence. Curious and a bit unsettled, I walked out to the parking lot where the orb had been. It was empty and still, with no weird smells or marks. The asphalt was cold under my boots, and the night was as calm as any other. No footprints, no tire marks, not even trash. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was puzzling how the cameras and sensors picked up no disturbances where the orb had been. No wind, no heat changes, no sounds. It was like a ghost light had floated through a vacuum. Over the next few nights, I kept a close watch on that camera, but nothing unusual appeared again. Just the standard views of empty parking lots and silent buildings. I mentioned the incident to my supervisor, who suggested it might be a glitch in the camera or some weird reflection. At first, that seemed plausible, especially since the orb didn't flicker or pixelate like a typical glitch would. It appeared smooth and steady. Sometimes, when I sit in the control room watching those rows of empty lots, I think about that night. The silence, the stillness, and that silently drifting, glowing orb in a place that should have been completely inactive. It stuck with me. A quiet reminder that not everything fits into what we perceive as real. I'm not sure I want to find out exactly what it was, but it remains a haunting memory of something unexplained, witnessed on an otherwise ordinary night. As I pedaled, I kept checking over my shoulder. The lights were there, staying a constant distance behind me, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow I went. At first, I thought they might be from another cyclist, or maybe a car, just traveling the same route late at night, which isn't uncommon. But there were no sounds, no engine noise, not even the whisper of tires rolling over asphalt. And the lights didn't behave like any car's lights. They weren't bobbing or weaving like headlights do when a car turns. No, these lights maintained a creepy, unwavering lockstep with me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. It felt like whatever was behind me was watching me. There were no engine sounds, no headlights, just two glowing orbs that matched every move I made. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. This eerie synchronization freaked me out. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe someone being overly cautious, but the silence accompanying those lights was unnerving. The further I rode, the stranger it got. Miles passed, and I decided to stop at a red light, hoping that would help me see exactly what was following me. I brought my bike to a halt and turned around. Instantly, the lights vanished. My heart raced. I lingered for a few seconds, then started pedaling again. Immediately, the lights reappeared, falling back into the same sync with my pace as before. It became increasingly hard to deny that something weird was happening. I rode through dimly lit neighborhoods, the only illumination coming from sparse street lamps and the occasional porch light. Still, those persistent lights stayed right behind me. I swerved sharply onto a side street to see if they would follow. They did, without any hesitation or change in speed. This wasn't just unsettling, it was downright creepy. I felt watched by something that didn't want to be seen. My nerves were on edge, my breathing shallow. Gripping the handlebars tightly, I pedaled faster, trying to escape whatever was trailing me. But no matter how I zigzagged through back streets and alleys, the lights kept up, never getting closer nor falling behind. I kept telling myself it was some kind of joke, maybe someone with a powerful flashlight having a laugh. But deep down, the precision with which those lights mimicked my every move made my skin crawl. The silent, persistent glow just wouldn't go away, sticking with me all the way until I reached home. I was biking home late one night, my heart racing as I pedaled down the dimly lit street. Suddenly, lights appeared behind me, mirroring my every move. They followed me as I sped up, slowed down, and even when I stopped at the corner of my street, they just vanished. There was no sound, no other vehicle in sight, just an eerie quiet. I rushed the last block, locked up my bike, and hurried inside, trying not to think about the strange lights that seemed too real to be imaginary. That wasn't the only odd encounter I've had. On a late summer night, I set up camp in a secluded clearing, slightly off the main trail. The spot was nothing special, just a private place to relax after a busy season. The forest around me buzzed with the usual nighttime sounds as I pitched my tent and settled in, too exhausted to worry about the tent zipper being fully closed. I fell asleep quickly, surrounded by the soft rustling of leaves and distant calls of frogs. The next morning, I woke up to the early dawn light and immediately noticed the tent zipper was partly open. Nothing inside was disturbed. My belongings were just as I left them. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it, knowing how the wind or wildlife could toy with a tent, but this felt different. I stepped out to investigate and found a perfect circle of flattened grass right next to my tent. It looked as though something heavy had pressed down on it, yet there were no footprints, no tire tracks, not even a broken branch nearby. The precision of the circle was unnerving, like it had been cut out with a giant cookie cutter. Both experiences left me uneasy, wondering if something was out there, watching, yet not wanting to be seen. I keep questioning whether it was all in my head or if what I saw and felt was real. The silence, the unexplained movements, and the precise circle in the grass, it all keeps me thinking about those nights, trying to make sense of things that seem beyond explanation. I was just wrapping up a late shift and caught the last train out of the city. It was about 11:30 p.m., and the train car was quiet, almost empty, except for a few people who looked as tired as I felt. Everyone was either dozing off or lost in their own world with headphones on. As the city's glow faded into the background, replaced by dark woods and fields, I found myself staring out the window, trying to pass the time by scrolling through my phone. That's when I saw something odd in the sky. At first, I thought it might be a helicopter or a drone, hovering just beyond the trees. But it didn't have any blinking lights typical of aircraft, and it was completely silent, floating about 200 feet up. It stayed perfectly still as the train moved. I tried to focus, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Earlier, I had a strange encounter while camping. I woke to find the zipper on my tent slightly open, which I didn't remember leaving that way. It seemed like it had been unzipped from the outside. The ground outside was dry, showing no footprints, just a circle of flattened grass. Inside, my gear was just as I left it, with nothing out of place. The lack of any signs that someone had been there, aside from the zipper and the flattened grass, left me uneasy. I checked the zipper for any snags or dirt that might explain it, unzipping by itself, but found nothing. Deciding not to stay any longer, I quickly packed up. As I hiked back to my car, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following me, but there was nothing. Back in town, I showed pictures of the grass circle to some experienced camping friends. They thought it was unusual too, and suggested it might be from a heavy bird or an animal, but that explanation didn't sit right with me. There were no feathers, droppings, or other traces. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that something or someone had been right outside my tent without leaving any real evidence. It felt like whatever it was had made sure I knew it had been there, yet didn't want to be seen. This experience, followed by the silent, unblinking object in the sky, left me with more questions than answers. As I continued my journey home, I tried to shake off the feeling, considering maybe an animal had tampered with my tent, or that I had moved the zipper in my sleep. But none of it seemed to fit the unsettling certainty that something unexplained had happened that night. I saw something strange on the train ride home the other night. Out of the window, there was this dark, oval shape hovering in the sky. It looked about 30 or 40 feet long, with a smooth matte surface that seemed to absorb any light nearby. This wasn't like any helicopter or drone. It had no mechanical features, no lights, no windows, and no rotors. It felt more organic than anything, yet it was void of any identifiable details. As the train curved, the object smoothly shifted its position to maintain the same distance from us. It didn't speed up or slow down, just matched our pace. I glanced around. None of the other passengers seemed to notice. They were either glued to their phones or looking out the other window. I thought about pointing it out, but hesitated, thinking how it would sound. When we passed a small rural station where the train slowed a bit, I got a clearer view of the object's underside. There were no engines, no landing gear, nothing that looked familiar. Just that odd, smooth body. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but the screen glare only reflected off the window, and each time I aimed the camera, the object seemed to fade slightly, as if it knew I was watching. Then, the weirdest thing happened. My phone lost all signal,